At our 50th anniversary party, surrounded by family, my wife raised her glass. "Richard," she announced, "I'm leaving you for a younger man." The room fell silent. My world shattered. But as she celebrated her new beginning, our lawyer walked in. "Helen," he said, his voice calm and cold, "before you go, there's a sunset clause we need to discuss." I had been preparing for this day for 5 years. The real party was about to begin. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The sunset clause. It sounds so poetic, so final, but it was not born from poetry. It was born from a heartbreak so profound it almost unmade me. To understand the cold legal precision of my plan, you must first understand the boundless. Romantic idealism, it was designed to protect. You must understand the 50 years I gave to a woman who was, for the longest time, my entire world. Her name was Helen. I was an architect, but she was my cathedral. From the moment I first saw her, a vision in a summer dress at a university garden party, every line I drew, every blueprint I designed was in some way for her. I was a man who built things from concrete and steel, but she was the one who taught me how to build a life. Our love story was a whirlwind, the kind you read about in novels. She was my muse, my inspiration. I designed our first home not as a house, but as a love letter to her. I remember showing her the initial sketches, my hands trembling with a nervous energy. "What is this, Richard?" she had asked, her eyes wide with wonder. "It's us," I had replied. "This bay window. This is where you'll sit and read in the afternoon sun. This garden. This is where we'll teach our children to plant flowers. This fireplace. This is where we'll grow old together." And for decades, it was exactly that. A perfect life, meticulously designed and lovingly constructed. I poured every ounce of my being into her happiness. She was a woman who blossomed in the familiar comfort of her social circle, who drew energy from the rhythm of her hometown. Early in my career, I was offered a prestigious partnership in a firm that would have taken us to London. A dream opportunity for any young architect. "London, Richard. Can you imagine?" she had said, her voice a mixture of excitement and deep, unspoken fear. "But my mother is here. My friends. Our life is here." I saw the conflict in her eyes, and for me, it was never a choice. "Then here is where we will stay," I had told her, tearing up the offer letter without a second thought. "My career is to build beautiful things, and the most beautiful thing I will ever build is our life, right here with you." I have never for one moment regretted that decision. I built a successful, respected firm right here, and I used its success to give her everything she ever desired. Spontaneous trips to Paris because she read an article about a new art exhibit. A summer home by the lake because the city summers were too stifling. I funded her ever-changing passions, from a short-lived career as an art gallery owner to her expensive foray into breeding prize-winning roses. Her happiness was the central project of my life, and I considered it a masterpiece. Our children, 2 wonderful kids, grew up in this idyllic world, a world insulated by their father's devotion and their mother's effortless grace. We were, to everyone who knew us, the perfect couple, the embodiment of a life well lived. The cracks, when they began to appear, were almost invisible. Hairline fractures in a flawless facade. It started about 10 years ago, after the children had left for college and the house grew quiet. A new restlessness began to stir in Helen. The contentment that had once defined her was replaced by a kind of ennui, a boredom with the very perfection she had asked me to create. "Don't you ever feel stuck, Richard?" she asked me one evening as we sat by the fireplace I had designed for us. "Stuck?" I was genuinely confused. "I feel like the luckiest man in the world," I have you, this home, a life of peace. Exactly, she had said, a strange, wistful look in her eyes. Peace. It's all so predictable. She started spending more time at the country club. She took up tennis with a fierce, competitive energy. Her wardrobe, always elegant, became more daring, more youthful. She was searching for something, a spark, a thrill that our quiet, comfortable life no longer provided. Then came the new friendships. She spoke glowingly of her tennis instructor, Julian, a man 30 years her junior. He's marvelous, Richard, she'd gush after her lessons. He has such vitality. He makes me feel young again. I, in my trusting, romantic haze, was happy for her. I was glad she had found a new passion. I encouraged it. I paid for the private lessons, the expensive equipment, the new tennis outfits. I was the devoted, supportive husband, completely oblivious to the nature of the vitality she was so enjoying. The first real alarm bell, the one that finally pierced through my fog of denial, was a credit card statement. We had always maintained separate accounts for personal spending, a system built on mutual trust. But a statement was accidentally mailed to my office. On it, nestled between charges for lunches at the club and new dresses, was a charge for a men's Rolex watch. A very, very expensive watch. It was not my birthday, it was not Christmas. It was not a gift for our son. I remember sitting in my office, the statement in my hand, my heart turning to a block of ice. It was a single, undeniable piece of data that contradicted the entire history of our life together. It was a historical anomaly. And like any good architect, I knew that when you find a crack in the foundation, you don't ignore it. You follow it to its source. An architect is, by nature, a detective. We are trained to see the world in layers, to understand the hidden structures that lie beneath the surface. For 40 years, I had applied that skill to buildings. Now, with a heart heavy with a dread I refused to name, I began to apply it to my own life. I did not confront her. A direct accusation would have been met with a storm of denial, of righteous indignation. She would have called me jealous, paranoid, a suffocating old man. She would have twisted it masterfully to be my fault. No, I needed more than suspicion. Like a builder examining a faulty foundation, I needed irrefutable proof. I needed a blueprint of her betrayal. I hired a private investigator. The name felt sordid, a cliché from a cheap detective novel, something that had no place in my elegant, well-ordered life. But the crack in my foundation was real, and I needed to know how deep it went. The man I hired, Mr. Evans, was a former police detective, a quiet, methodical man with sad, tired eyes. He seemed to understand my pain without me having to speak it. "What am I looking for, Mr. Sterling?" he had asked during our first clandestine meeting. I couldn't bring myself to say the word affair. It felt too vulgar, too cheap for the 50-year history she was destroying. "Just inconsistencies," I had replied, my voice hoarse. "My wife, Helen, has a new circle of friends, a new hobby, tennis. I just want to understand her new life better. I want to ensure she is safe." It was a lie, of course. A polite fiction to mask the raw, gaping wound of my suspicion. He knew it, and I knew he knew it. The first report arrived a week later in a plain manila envelope. My hands trembled as I opened it. It was a collection of photographs, grainy, long-distance shots, but their meaning was brutally clear. There was Helen laughing with Julian, her tennis instructor, at a secluded table in a restaurant I had never heard of. There was a picture of them leaving a boutique hotel on the coast, a hotel she had told me she was visiting for a charity luncheon. And there, on his wrist, was the unmistakable glint of a Rolex watch. Each photograph was a hammer blow to the beautiful structure of my life. The walls of my denial, so carefully constructed over the past few years, came crashing down. The predictable life she had complained about was a lie. She had been living a secret, parallel life, A life of cheap thrills and sordid deceptions, all funded by the very stability she claimed to despise. The pain was a physical thing, a crushing weight in my chest that made it hard to breathe. For days, I walked through my perfect house like a ghost. Every object, every piece of furniture I had designed and built for her was now a monument to my own blindness, my own foolish devotion. The bay window where she was supposed to read in the sun was just a window. The garden where we were supposed to grow old was just a patch of dirt. The cathedral I had built for her had become a tomb. My first instinct was to destroy it all, to confront her, to file for divorce, to burn the whole rotten structure to the ground. But then I thought of our children, of our grandchildren. I thought of the 50 years of shared history, of the good memories that were now being poisoned by this single, selfish act. A messy public divorce would not just end our marriage, it would obliterate our entire family history, leaving only the ugly scorch marks of betrayal. And then I thought of the promise I had made to her at our wedding, to love, honor, and protect her, always. And in a strange, twisted way, I realized that protecting her now meant protecting her from her own worst impulses, from the destructive greed of the parasite she had attached herself to. Julian was not in this for love. He was in this for her money, or rather, for my money. If I simply filed for divorce, the laws of community property meant she would walk away with half of everything I had ever built. And Julian would be right, there, waiting to bleed her dry. She would be left with nothing. It was in that moment of profound heartbreak that the architect in me, the strategist, finally reawakened. I could not save the marriage, but I could, perhaps, control the demolition. I could design a final legal structure that would protect my legacy and, in a strange way, protect Helen from herself. I went back to my old friend and lawyer, Mr. Gable. He was a man of the old school, a believer in contracts and consequences. I laid out the investigator's report on his polished mahogany desk. He looked at the photographs, his face a mask of grim disappointment. "I am so sorry, Richard," he said, his voice quiet. "I do not want a divorce, Thomas," I said, my voice steady, surprising even myself. "Not yet. I want to build a firewall. I want to draft a post-nuptial agreement. A sunset clause, let's call it." Gable's eyebrows shot up. "A post-nup? After 50 years? Helen will never sign it. She'll know something is wrong." "She will sign it," I said, a cold, hard certainty solidifying in my heart. "Because I am going to present it to her not as a weapon, but as a gift. It will be the greatest, most loving act of devotion I have ever shown her. And her own arrogance, her own belief in my blindness, will be the ink that signs her own financial death warrant." The plan I presented to my lawyer, Mr. Gable, was a delicate piece of psychological architecture. It was built not on legal aggression, but on a deep, 50-year understanding of my wife's character, her vanity, her casual disregard for details. She deemed boring, and most importantly, her absolute, unshakable belief in her own intellectual superiority over me. "We will frame it as an act of ultimate love and protection, Thomas," I explained, sketching out the strategy as if it were a floor plan. "It will be a comprehensive estate plan update. We will call it the Sterling Legacy Trust. Its stated purpose will be to protect Helen, to ensure that if I were to pass away first, she would be completely and utterly secure, shielded from estate, taxes, from probate court, from any and all complications. It will be my final gift to her, a testament to a lifetime of devotion." Gable was skeptical. "And the clause? The real one?" "The sunset clause, as we're calling it, will be buried deep, within the driest, most technical section of the document," I said. "It will be cloaked in the dense, impenetrable language of trust and estate law. It will be a single, elegant paragraph stating that in the event of a marital dissolution initiated due to proven infidelity, the trust's primary beneficiary designation automatically and irrevocably shifts to me. All assets will revert to my sole and separate control. She will never see it. She will be too busy admiring the grand, beautiful rooms of the trust I have built for her to ever inspect the foundation. It was a cynical, manipulative plan, and a part of me hated myself for it. It used the very tools of love and trust as instruments of deception. But David had taught me a valuable lesson. To defeat a master manipulator, you must be willing to play their game, but you must play it better. The performance I gave that evening was worthy of an Oscar. I presented the idea to Helen over a candlelit dinner in the very dining room I had designed for our anniversary celebrations. I spoke not of contracts, but of love, of legacy, of my overwhelming desire to ensure her happiness for the rest of her days, even if I were not there. Helen, my love, I began, my voice thick with a carefully crafted emotion. We've built a beautiful life together, and I've been thinking, I want to make sure that everything we've built is protected. For you. I've had Mr. Gable draw up a new trust. It puts everything, the house, the investments, everything, into a single protected entity in your name. It's my way of saying thank you for 50 wonderful years. Her eyes, which had lately been so distant, filled with a mixture of surprise and genuine avaricious pleasure. She saw not a trap, but a coronation. She saw her loving, slightly sentimental husband finally acknowledging her as the true queen of the empire he had built. When we met with Gable a week later to sign the documents, she barely glanced at the pages. She was too busy asking questions about the trust's name, about the official stationery. She signed the document with a flourish, her pen stroke sealing her own fate. As she slid the papers back across the polished desk, she patted my hand. "You are a good man, Richard," she said, her voice filled with a condescending affection. "A simple man, but a good one." I simply smiled and nodded. The trap was set. And then I waited. For 5 years, I lived a lie. I was a ghost in my own home, a silent observer of my own life's slow-motion demolition. I played the part of the devoted, slightly oblivious husband. I continued to fund her expensive hobbies, to compliment her youthful new wardrobe, to listen to her endless stories about the brilliant, witty Julian. Every polite smile was an act of will. Every quiet dinner was a performance of breathtaking hypocrisy. Meanwhile, the investigator, Mr. Evans, continued his quiet work. The manila envelopes continued to arrive each month, each one a fresh stab to my heart. Photographs of them on secret vacations, hotel receipts, credit card statements detailing lavish gifts. I did not look at them with the rage of a wronged husband anymore. I looked at them with the dispassionate eye of an architect reviewing building permits. I was simply collecting the necessary materials for the final phase of my project. I was building a case, not for a courtroom, but for a moment. A single decisive moment when her betrayal would be so public, so undeniable, that she would have no escape. Our 50th anniversary became the target. It was her idea, of course. A grand party to celebrate a half-century of a perfect marriage. It was the ultimate act of public hypocrisy, and therefore the perfect stage for the truth. She threw herself into the planning with a manic energy, designing every detail to project an image of timeless love and effortless elegance. I let her. I funded it all, watching as she created the beautiful, opulent theater for her own downfall. She was the director, the set designer, the star of the show. She had no idea that I was the playwright, and I had already written the final, devastating act. As the day of the party approached, I made my final moves. I informed Mr. Gable that the sunset clause was about to be activated. I gave him the entire 5-year file from the investigator, a meticulously organized history of her deceit, and I instructed him on his timing. He was not to act until he received a specific email from Helen, an email I knew she would be foolish enough to send. an email formally requesting to begin divorce proceedings. And then he was to walk into that party, at the very height of her triumph, and bring the curtain down. On the morning of our anniversary, as I stood in my suit, preparing to face the final performance of my life, I felt a strange sense of peace. The architect in me knew that the structure I had designed was sound. Every joint was secure, every support was in place. All that was left was for Helen herself to pull out the keystone. The garden was a masterpiece. Our garden. The one I had, designed for her 50 years ago, now in full, breathtaking bloom under the golden light of the late afternoon sun. Roses, her favorite, climbed the trellises, their scent mingling with the soft melodies of the string quartet I had hired. Champagne, flutes clinked, laughter echoed across the manicured lawn. To our guests, to our children and grandchildren, it was the perfect picture of a half-century of love, the culmination of a life beautifully lived. To me, it was a stage, meticulously set for a tragedy. I moved through the crowd, a benign, smiling host, accepting congratulations, my arm linked with Helen's. She was radiant, a queen in her domain. She wore a stunning silk dress in a shade of blue that matched her eyes, and a diamond necklace I had gifted her on our 40th anniversary. She played the part of the adoring wife to perfection, her hand resting lightly on mine, her laughter bright and easy. No one could have guessed that her touch felt like ice against my skin, or that her laughter sounded to me like the shattering of glass. Every smile I returned was a performance. Every polite conversation was a line from a script I had been rehearsing for 5 long years. I was an architect of facades, after all. I had spent a lifetime designing beautiful exteriors that concealed the complex, hidden structures within. My own life had become my final, most challenging project. Our son, Michael, and daughter, Elizabeth, floated through the party, their faces beaming with pride. They were so happy for us, so proud of the legacy of love their parents had created. They were completely oblivious to the fault line running directly beneath their feet, about to split their entire world in two. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. 50 years, Dad, Michael said, clapping me on the shoulder, his eyes misty. You and Mom are the gold standard. Truly. We've been very lucky, son, I replied, the lie feeling heavy on my tongue. I saw Julian arrive. He did not come through the main entrance, but through a side gate, a discreet guest mingling with the caterers. Helen's eyes met his across the garden, a brief, almost imperceptible exchange that was invisible to everyone, but me. I had studied her for so long I could read her every subtle signal, every hidden message. It was a look of shared anticipation, of a secret plan about to come to fruition. His presence here was her final arrogant act of defiance, a secret lover brought to witness the public execution of her marriage. I maintained my smile. I continued to play my part. I was the ghost at my own celebration, watching a life that was no longer mine. I looked at the faces of our oldest friends, people who had been with us since the beginning, people who had witnessed our wedding, celebrated the birth of our children. They saw Richard and Helen, the perfect couple. They had no idea they were about to witness the final, spectacular demolition of that carefully constructed image. As the sun began to set, casting long, dramatic shadows across the lawn, the time for the speeches arrived. Our son, Michael, spoke first, his voice thick with genuine emotion as he spoke of his deep admiration for our enduring love. Elizabeth followed, her tearful tribute to our fairy tale marriage, a masterpiece of unintentional irony. With every heartfelt word, they were unknowingly raising the stakes, making the betrayal that was about to come even more devastating. Then it was my turn. I stood up, my hands trembling slightly, not from age or nerves, but from the immense, contained pressure of the moment. I held a small velvet-wrapped box in my hand. Inside was the gift I had planned to give her, a simple, elegant compass, its needle crafted from a sliver of meteorite. The symbolism was now a cruel joke. "My dearest Helen," I began, my voice catching, a sound that was only partially an act. 50 years ago, on a day much like this one, we promised each other a lifetime. You have been my true north, my guiding star. You have been the architect of my happiness. I saw her smile, a soft, almost pitying expression. She thought this was the sentimental rambling of a devoted old fool. "And so," I continued, "as we look towards the sunset of our years, I wanted to give you this." But before I could open the box, she gently placed her hand on mine, stopping me. She stood up, her movement graceful, commanding the attention of the entire party. A strange, triumphant light shone in her eyes. The moment had come. Her moment. "Richard, my dear," she said, her voice clear and strong, resonating through the suddenly silent garden. "Your words are beautiful, as they always are." She turned to address our guests, her smile brilliant, captivating. "Richard is a builder of beautiful things, and he has built a beautiful life for me, for us, for 50 years, and for that, I will always be grateful." She paused, taking a sip of her champagne, a perfect theatrical gesture. "But as he so rightly says, we are in the sunset of our years, and a sunset is not just an ending, it is also a promise of a new dawn, and I have decided, after much soul-searching, to embrace a new dawn of my own." A confused, expectant silence fell over the garden. Our guests leaned forward, their smiles frozen on their faces, assuming this was the beginning of some grand romantic announcement, perhaps a renewal of our vows, or the unveiling of a surprise trip around the world. Our children, Michael and Elizabeth, looked at their mother with expressions of adoration, ready to applaud her eloquent tribute. I stood beside her, my hand still holding the unopened gift box, a silent, unwilling participant in my own execution. I was the only person in that entire garden who knew that this was not a new dawn, but the beginning of a long and terrible night. Helen's gaze swept across the crowd, and then, with a deliberate, theatrical cruelty, it landed on me. Her smile was gone, replaced by an expression of cool, unapologetic resolve. "Richard," she announced, her voice as clear and sharp as breaking glass, "I have a final announcement to make. After 50 years of a life lived for others, I have decided to live for myself. I am leaving you." The collective gasp from our guests was a physical thing, a wave of shock that rippled across the manicured lawn. Michael and Elizabeth stared at their mother, their faces slack with disbelief, as if she had just started speaking in a foreign language. Friends who had known us for half a century looked at each other, their wine glasses frozen halfway to their lips. But she wasn't finished. Her cruelty, I knew, had to have a final public flourish. She raised her hand and pointed towards the edge of the patio, where Julian, her tennis instructor, had been lurking in the shadows. He now stepped forward, a smug, triumphant smirk on his face. "I am leaving you to begin a new life with Julian," she declared, her voice ringing with a defiant pride. "He has shown me what it means to feel alive, to feel passionate again. Our journey together begins tonight." If the first announcement was a shockwave, this was the earthquake that brought the entire structure of the evening crashing down. Whispers started, harsh and scandalized. "Julian, her tennis instructor? He's half her age! In front of everyone? In front of him?" I looked at my children. Their adoration had turned to horror. Elizabeth's hand flew to her mouth, a choked sob escaping her lips. Michael's face was a thunderous mask of rage and humiliation. They were not just witnessing the end of their parents' marriage. They were witnessing the public demolition of their entire family's reputation, of the gold standard he had so proudly toasted just minutes before. I stood there motionless, the small compass box feeling impossibly heavy in my hand. I was vaguely aware of the gift slipping from my numb fingers and falling to the grass with a soft, unnoticed thud. My mind, the architect's mind, was observing the demolition with a strange, detached calm. The facade was crumbling, just as I had designed it to. The load-bearing walls of 50 years of lies were collapsing in on themselves. Helen, seeming to draw strength from the chaos she had created, turned to me, her eyes cold and dismissive. "I will have my lawyer contact yours in the morning, Richard," she said, her tone businesslike, as if she were discussing a catering contract. "I'm sure you'll be reasonable. Half of everything, of course. The house, the investments. It's only fair." She then turned to Julian, a brilliant, predatory smile on her face. "Shall we, my love?" she said, taking his arm. They were about to make their grand exit, leaving me and the ruins of our life behind them. They were just 2 steps away from a clean getaway. And then a new voice, calm and authoritative, cut through the shocked silence of the garden. "That won't be necessary, Helen." All heads turned. Standing at the entrance to the garden was a tall, imposing figure in a perfectly tailored dark suit. It was Mr. Thomas Gable, our family lawyer for over 40 years, a man whose presence commanded an immediate and absolute respect. He was holding a leather briefcase, and his face was as grim and unreadable as a granite tombstone. Helen froze, her hand tightening on Julian's arm. "Thomas," she said, her voice suddenly losing its confident edge. "What are you doing here? I didn't invite you." "No, you did not," Gable replied, his steps slow and deliberate as he walked towards us across the lawn, the crowd parting before him like the Red Sea. "But you did send me an email approximately 7 minutes ago. An email with the subject line, initiating divorce proceedings. As your legal counsel, I considered it an urgent matter that required my immediate attention." He stopped directly in front of her, his gaze unwavering. Julian, the smug gigolo, seemed to shrink under his scrutiny, instinctively taking a half-step behind Helen. Gable looked from Helen's suddenly pale face to my own. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. The final piece of the plan had just been moved into place. "Before you and Mr. Julian go anywhere," Gable continued, his voice now a cold, legal blade, "and before we discuss the division of any assets, there is the small matter of a legally binding document we need to address. A document you signed, Helen, 5 years ago. I believe we called it the Sunset Clause." The words Sunset Clause hung in the air, thick with a meaning that only 3 people in that entire garden understood. To the guests, it sounded poetic, mysterious. To Helen, it was a half-forgotten piece of boring legal paperwork from years ago, a distant echo that suddenly sounded like a warning siren. I could see the confusion warring with her arrogance, a faint, condescending smile returning to her lips. "The Sunset Clause?" she repeated, with a dismissive little laugh. "Thomas, really? You're being overly dramatic. That was just some estate planning nonsense Richard insisted on years ago. Something about protecting me from taxes if he passed away. It has nothing to do with this." "On the contrary, Helen," Gable replied, his voice as cold and hard as the marble statues flanking the garden path. "It has everything to do with this. You see, your memory of the document is, shall we say, incomplete. While it did indeed contain provisions to protect you in the event of Richard's death, it also contained provisions to protect Richard in the event of a different kind of death, the death of a 50-year vow." Gable placed his leather briefcase on a small marble-topped table. He opened it with a series of sharp, deliberate clicks that echoed in the tense silence. He removed a thick, blue-bound document. It was the original copy of the Sterling Legacy, Trust, the post-nuptial agreement she had signed with such careless, dismissive haste 5 years ago. You may not recall, Gable continued, his tone that of a professor lecturing a particularly dull student. But you signed this document in my office in the presence of 2 witnesses on May 15th, 5 years ago. A document, I might add, that I strongly advised you to read thoroughly and to have your own independent counsel review. Advice which you declined. Helen's confident smile began to waver. I could see her trying to recall the details of that day, trying to dismiss it as insignificant. It was just a formality, she insisted, though her voice had lost its conviction. Richard wanted to put everything in a trust for me. It was a gift. It was indeed a gift, Helen, I said, speaking for the first time since her announcement. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the air with a newfound strength. It was a gift of my absolute unconditional trust, a trust which, it now appears, was misplaced. Gable opened the document to a tabbed page, marked Section 11. If I may direct your attention to subsection B, he said, his voice a dispassionate legal monotone. The Sunset Clause. It states, and I quote, "In the event of a marital dissolution, initiated by either party, predicated upon a material breach of the marital vow of fidelity, all assets, real and financial, held within the Sterling Legacy Trust shall immediately and irrevocably revert to the sole and separate ownership of the non-breaching party." He let the words sink in. A confused murmur went through the crowd as they tried to decipher the dense legalese. But Helen understood. Oh, she understood perfectly. The color drained from her face, leaving behind a pasty, grayish pallor. Her manicured hand, still clutching Julian's arm, began to tremble. "Breach of fidelity?" she stammered, her eyes wide with a dawning, panicked horror. You can't prove that. That's a baseless, slanderous accusation." This was the moment, the final, beautifully engineered piece of the demolition. Gable did not reply. He simply reached back into his briefcase and produced a second item, a large tablet. He tapped the screen, and the 60-inch television that Helen had insisted on installing for outdoor movie nights, the very symbol of her modern, luxurious taste, flickered to life behind us. "As per the requirements of the clause," Gable announced, "to the horrified crowd, a formal presentation of proof is now required." The first image that appeared on the screen was a crystal-clear photograph of Helen and Julian, kissing passionately on the balcony of a hotel room in Paris. A date and time stamp was clearly visible in the corner. The photograph had been taken during a charity fundraising trip she had supposedly taken alone. A collective gasp, louder this time, went through the garden. Our children, Michael and Elizabeth, stared at the screen, their faces a mixture of devastation and disgust. The screen changed. A new image. Helen and Julian, holding hands, walking into a jewelry store. The date corresponded to the week the Rolex watch had appeared on my credit card statement. Another image, the two of them, laughing, on a private yacht in the Caribbean. A trip she had explained as a wellness retreat with her girlfriends. The slideshow continued. A meticulous 5-year visual history of her lies. It was a silent, brutal, and undeniable presentation of the truth. With each new image, another piece of Helen's carefully constructed world turned to ash. The guests were no longer just shocked, they were witnesses. They were a jury, and the verdict was unanimous. Finally, Gable turned off the screen, plunging the garden back into the twilight. He looked at Helen, whose face had crumpled into a mask of utter ruin. She was no longer the triumphant queen. She was just a frightened, exposed old woman. "The clause, Helen," Gable said, his voice leaving no room for doubt, "has been triggered. Your email, your public announcement, and this extensive documentation constitute irrefutable proof. As of this moment, as per the legal document you yourself signed, you no longer have any claim to this house, to the investment portfolio, or to any of the assets held within the Sterling Legacy Trust. They now belong solely and exclusively to Richard. Mr. Gable's final words landed with the force of a physical blow. The silence that followed was not the respectful hush of a moment before, but a thick, suffocating vacuum, the kind that precedes a storm. Helen stood as if turned to stone, her face a grotesque mask of disbelief and horror. The beautiful, triumphant queen of the party had become, in the space of 5 minutes, a dethroned, destitute pariah in her own garden. The first sound that broke the silence was not from Helen, but from her lover, Julian. He dropped her arm as if it were a venomous snake. His charming, confident facade dissolved, replaced by a look of raw, panicked greed. "What is he talking about?" he snarled, his voice a low, ugly sound that was nothing like the smooth, sophisticated tone he had used before. He wasn't speaking to the crowd or to Gable, he was speaking to Helen. "No claim? What does he mean, no claim? You told me everything was 50-50. You told me the house alone was worth 10 million. Helen flinched as if he had struck her. She turned to him, her eyes pleading. "Julian, darling, it's just a legal trick, a misunderstanding. We can fight this." "Fight it with what?" he sneered, his voice rising, all pretense of affection gone, revealing the naked, grasping parasite beneath. "With your credit cards? The ones Richard pays for? You told me you were a wealthy woman, Helen. You told me you were my partner." "I am," she cried, her voice cracking. "We are." "No," he said, taking a deliberate step back from her, creating a physical and symbolic distance between them for all to see. "It seems we are nothing. It seems you are nothing." He looked her up and down, his gaze filled with a cold, transactional contempt. "You're just a 72-year-old woman with expensive taste and apparently no money. You are of no use to me." He turned, and without another word, without a single backward glance at the woman for whom he had just destroyed a 50-year marriage, he walked away. He pushed through the stunned crowd, a coward fleeing a battle he had already lost, and disappeared into the darkness. His public denunciation was a brutal, merciless act, a final public stripping of Helen's dignity. She made a small, wounded sound, like a dying animal, and swayed on her feet. Our daughter, Elizabeth, rushed forward and caught her before she could fall, holding her mother as she began to sob, not with regret, but with the raw, guttural cries of a gambler who has just lost everything on a single, final bet. The guests, who minutes before had been celebrating our love, now began to disperse, their faces a mixture of pity, disgust, and a morbid, self-righteous satisfaction. They were fleeing the scene of a social catastrophe, eager to carry the scandalous story with them. They avoided my eyes. They avoided my children's eyes. The Sterling family party was over. The Sterling family itself seemed to be over. My son, Michael, stood frozen, his face a storm of conflicting emotions. I could see the rage at his mother's betrayal, the humiliation of the public spectacle, and a dawning, terrible understanding of the quiet, strategic man his father truly was. He looked at me, not with the adoration of before, but with a new, fearful respect. I felt nothing, not triumph, not satisfaction, just a vast, hollow emptiness. This was the demolition I had planned, but witnessing the human cost, the raw pain, on my children's faces was a burden I had not fully anticipated. I had won, but it was a victory that felt in that moment like a profound and terrible loss. I walked through the wreckage of the party, the overturned glasses, the half-eaten food, the abandoned decorations of a celebration that had become a funeral. I walked past my daughter, who was trying to comfort her inconsolable mother. I walked past my son, who was staring into the empty space where his perfect family used to be. I walked to the spot on the lawn where the gift box had fallen. I knelt down, my old knees protesting, and picked it up from the damp grass. The velvet was cold, dewy. I brushed the dirt from its surface. The architect in me, the builder, felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to fix what was broken. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that some things, once shattered, could never be put back together again. I stood up, holding the box, and turned to face the last, remaining vestiges of my family. The time for legal pronouncements was over. The time for the human verdict had begun. I walked over to where my family had collapsed in on itself. Helen was slumped in a garden chair, her face a ravaged mask of tears and ruined makeup, looking not elegant, but merely old and defeated. Elizabeth was kneeling beside her, stroking her hair, whispering words of comfort that seemed to have no effect. Michael stood a few feet away, a helpless, angry statue, his fists clenched at his sides. They were no longer the confident, polished sterlings of high society. They were just three broken people in a garden full of ghosts. They all looked up as I approached, their eyes filled with a mixture of fear, anger, and a desperate, unspoken question. What now? I did not speak to them. Not at first. I let the heavy, uncomfortable silence do the work. I let them sit with the consequences of their choices, with the rubble of the world they had just demolished. Finally, I turned to Helen. She shrank back in her chair, unable to meet my gaze. She was a stranger to me now, a woman I had shared a bed with for 50 years. Yet I felt as if I was seeing her for the first time, stripped of all the artifice and illusion. Was it worth it, Helen? I asked, my voice not angry, not accusatory, but quiet, filled with a genuine, weary curiosity. Was the cheap thrill of a secret life worth all of this? You don't understand, she whispered, her voice a raw, broken sound. I was so bored. Our life, it was perfect, too perfect. It was like living in one of your blueprints, Richard. Every line straight, every angle perfect. There was no life in it. No life? I replied, a sad, bitter smile touching my lips. The life was in the building of it, Helen. The life was in the shared struggle, in the late nights, in the sacrifices we made for each other. You weren't bored with our life. You were bored with peace. You were bored with loyalty. You were bored with the quiet, steady love that you had mistaken for a cage. I looked at our children, at their devastated faces. And you, I said, my voice hardening slightly. You were our greatest project. We gave you everything. Not just money, but a foundation, a name built on integrity. And you stood by and watched as she took a sledgehammer to that foundation. You were so blinded by the comfort of this life, you never bothered to inspect its structure. What were we supposed to do, Dad? Michael finally choked out, his voice thick with a mixture of shame and resentment. She's our mother. I am your father, I replied, my voice rising for the first time, a flash of the old, powerful architect breaking through the quiet retiree. Your duty was not to choose a side. Your duty was to the truth. Your duty was to the family, the entire family, that she was willing to sacrifice for a tennis instructor and a new sports car. The accusation hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. They had no defense. I let the silence return. Then I took a deep, cleansing breath. The anger was gone, replaced by a profound finality. I opened the small velvet box in my hand. Inside, the meteorite compass glinted in the dim party lights. I didn't give it to Helen. Instead, I held it out to my children. This was to be my gift to your mother, I said quietly. A compass. I thought perhaps we could use it to find a new direction together, for our final years. But it seems we are all on different journeys now. I looked at Elizabeth, then at Michael. Your mother has lost her way. And you have been following her without a map for years. You have no inheritance. You have no trust fund waiting for you. The name you carry, the sterling name, is now tarnished by this evening's scandal. Everything you thought you had is gone. I pressed the compass into my son's hand. His fingers closed around it, cold and trembling. This is all I have left to give you, I said. A moral compass. Your grandfather was a builder. Your father was an architect. We built things that last. Now, it is your turn. Go and build your own lives. Build them with honesty. Build them with integrity. Build something you can be proud of, not something you have to lie about. Find your own true north. I looked at Helen one last time, slumped and broken in her chair. I felt a flicker of the old love, the ghost of a 50-year habit. But it was just that, a ghost. The woman I had loved, the woman I had built my world for, was gone. She had been gone for a long time. Goodbye, Helen, I said softly, and then I turned my back on all of them. I walked away from the party, from the house, from the life I had, so meticulously designed. I walked away from the ruins, leaving them with nothing but a compass and the impossible, daunting task of finding their own way out of the darkness they had created. I was no longer their husband, no longer their father. I was just Richard, the architect, and it was time to design something new. I did not see Helen again after that night. Our divorce was a quiet, swift affair, a legal formality handled entirely by Mr. Gable. The sunset clause was ironclad. She left with her personal belongings, her designer clothes, her jewelry, and a small court-mandated alimony, enough to live on, but not nearly enough to sustain the life of luxury she had grown accustomed to. The parasite Julian, having already abandoned her at the party, was never heard from again. She had traded a 50-year legacy for a fleeting thrill and was left with nothing but the bitter ashes of her choice. I heard through the grapevine that she moved to a small, unassuming town a few states away, a place where the sterling name meant nothing. My children, Michael and Elizabeth, were set adrift in a world they were completely unprepared for. The social circles they had worked so hard to belong to now shunned them. The easy credit and casual business opportunities that had come with being a sterling dried up. For the first time in their lives, they were forced to confront the stark, unforgiving reality of a world without my financial safety net. Their journey, the one I had tasked them with, the journey of finding their own true north, would be a long and difficult one. I could only hope that the moral compass I had given them would one day guide them to a shore of their own making. And what of the architect? The man who had so deliberately demolished his own masterpiece? I sold the house. That beautiful, perfect house, so filled with the ghosts of a life that was no longer mine, was sold to a young family who I hoped would fill its empty rooms with new, happier memories. With the proceeds and the considerable fortune from the trust that was now solely mine, I did not buy a new mansion or a fast car. I did something I had wanted to do for 30 years. I bought a small, rugged piece of land on the coast, a place of wild, untamed beauty, of wind and rock and sea. And there, with my own 2 hands, I began to build again. It was not a grand house. It was a small, simple cabin designed not to impress, but to embrace the landscape around it. It had large windows that faced the ocean and a single fireplace built from stones I gathered from the beach. It was a house with no pretense, no facade. It was honest. It was real. In building that small home, I began to rebuild myself. The years of quiet, gnawing pain of living a lie began to fall away with each cut of the saw, each strike of the hammer. I was no longer Richard, the husband of Helen Sterling. I was no longer Richard, the father of Michael and Elizabeth. I was just Richard, the architect, the builder. One day, about a year after I had moved in, a package arrived. There was no return address. Inside was the meteorite compass I had left on the lawn that night. Tucked beneath it was a single folded piece of paper. It was a letter from my son Michael. "Dad," it began, the handwriting clumsy, uncertain. "I don't know if you'll ever forgive us. Maybe we don't deserve it. This past year, it's been the hardest of our lives. We lost everything we thought was important. But," and here the ink was slightly smudged as if by a tear, "in losing everything, we've started to find something. Liz is working as a teacher's aide. I'm working for a small local construction crew. It's hard work. It's honest work. For the first time, I think I understand what you were trying to teach us." He wrote that they didn't want my money. They didn't want the house. They just wanted me to know that they were finally trying to build something of their own. The letter ended with a simple, hopeful question. "We still have the compass. Maybe one day you could teach us how to use it." I folded the letter and placed it, along with the compass, on the mantelpiece of the fireplace I had built. The journey for my children would be long, but for the first time, they were on the right path. They were finally finding their own true north. As for me, I have found mine. My life is quiet now, but it is not empty. It is filled with the sound of the ocean, the scent of sawdust, and the deep, abiding peace of a man who is finally, truly at home with himself. I had spent 50 years designing a perfect life for someone else. I have learned, in the sunset of my years, that the most beautiful structures are not the ones we build for others, but the ones we build within ourselves. And that is a foundation that can never be taken away. If this story of betrayal, justice, and the difficult path to redemption has resonated with you, please show your support by liking and sharing this video. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that explore the complex architecture of the human heart. Thank you for watching.